All right, guys, we're going to start our short story. This is Cluster 3, part of Unit 1, our last short story in this unit. When do we really know someone? That is the same essential question that we're focusing on, okay? All right, so it says set a purpose. Let's find out how race and ethnicity affect the way people view themselves and each other.
The first day I saw Jimmy T. Black, I thought he was a real Indian, realer than me. I thought that even before I heard him tell a group of kids hanging around him that his middle initial stood for Thorpe. Jim Thorpe was the sock and fox guy who won the Olympics about a century ago and was the world's greatest athlete. I'd heard a bunch of Jim Thorpe stories from Uncle Tommy Fox, who is 84 years old and has packed more living into his life than most people could experience in 3 centuries. Uncle Tommy knew Jim Thorpe. He met him back in 1937 when Uncle Tommy went to Hollywood as a kid and got lots of bit parts as anonymous Indian number 2 or 3, who spectacularly falls off his horse when the fair-haired cowboy hero fires his 6-shooter. But this story isn't actually about Uncle Tommy, even though he is sort of part of it. This happened the autumn when Uncle Tommy was away visiting his grandchildren out in New Mexico. So I'll get back to Jimmy T. and our high school, which is, of course, where I first met him. Long Pond Central High School is pretty big for the North Country. It draws in students from all the little towns and hamlets around what we laughingly call the major population center of Long Pond. Long Pond High is big enough to have 11-man football. Before our school was built, the little regional high schools could barely scrape together a 5-guy basketball team. Now, with 100 seniors and even more kids in our junior class, we have the whole range of sports, from football to girls basketball. And because there's not much else to do around here, we always get big crowds at all our sporting events. When you go to a high school in a town so small that if you blink you'll miss it, everyone knows who you are, not just your name and your face. They know everything about you, including stuff you wish they'd forget. That's especially true in school, where you've been with some of the same kids ever since preschool. They remember the time when you were 5 and got expelled for a week, because you bit a certain girl in the butt so hard you left tooth marks. Another thing everyone remembers about me is my hair. It's long now, and black as Jimmy T's. But everyone in school remembers that until 6th grade, my hair was kind of dirty brown. That's what happens when your father was an Indian, but your mom is Swedish and as blonde as Broomhilda. Despite the hair coloring that I comb in every week or so, I know my classmates still see the old Mitchell Sabatis, would-be Native American. I tan up real dark in the summer, but during the winter, my skin gets as pale as something you might find under a rock. Summer is the big season for visitors up here. A few locals still work in the woods, but the logging business isn't what it used to be anymore. Our biggest industry is tourism. Tourism was what brought Jim Thorpe Black and 3 other new kids to our school. Their families moved here because of the new Long Pond Northern Adirondack Interpretive Center. One new high schooler coming to a community as tight-knit as Long Pond makes waves. 4 was a tsunami. When new kids come to a high school, there are 2 ways it can go. One is that everybody tries to get to know them. 2 is that people hang back to check them out before making a move. With Jimmy T, it was approach numero uno all the way. Word had gotten out that this new kid was a star quarterback. Coach had mentioned it at one of our preseason practices. He'd been all-league last year as a junior in a big city school. Scouts from Notre Dame and Syracuse were already interested. After decades of our being the doormats of the North Country League, this football season might be different. At a school like ours, a winning quarterback would be like Moses and Eminem rolled up into one. Long Pond kids flocked around Jimmy T the way bees swarm around honey. With his black hair, olive skin, and shiny teeth, Jimmy T had the stage presence of a pop idol. "Doesn't he look like Enrique Iglesias?" one girl whispered to another as they pushed past me to get closer to him. To me, though, Jimmy T looked like that Indian guy in Dances with Wolves. The one who calls out at the end, "Dances with Wolves, you will always be my friend." I know there are problems with that movie. Like that, it is yet another one of those movies where the adopted white guy is even better at being an Indian than the real skins. Like that scene where he finds the buffalo herd before the Indians do. I mean, get real. But the one corny thought that went through my mind when I first saw Jimmy T, with his turquoise bracelets and that bone choker around his neck, was that I wanted to hear him yell that to me. "Mitchell Sabates, you will always be my friend." Like I said, corny. But while everyone else made up to Jimmy T, I hung back. That's always been my way. Wait and see Sabates, that's me, even in sports. In basketball, I'm the guy who hangs back on the other team's fast break, so that when we get the ball again, I can take the pass down court and lay it up. And in football, I'm the same. I follow my blockers when I'm at tailback, or when I'm playing D-back. I play off my man enough so that the quarterback thinks he's not covered. When it comes to wild parties or doing crazy things, I'm the one who says, "Cool, but I'll catch you guys later." I spend all my spare time at Uncle Tommy's house learning Indian stuff. Summers, I work with him at the Indian tourist village. So I have this complicated rep as a jock, a brainiac, and sort of an outsider. Which is how the 3 other new kids were being treated. Those white kids were getting the full-scale outsider treatment. I should explain, before you get the wrong idea, that their last name was a misnomer, because they weren't. They were black. There had never been any black kids at our school before. It isn't that we're segregated. It's just that 99% of the African American population in New York State is outside the northern Adirondack Mountain region. African Americans who pass through are treated just like any other flatlanders with money to add to the local economy. But as far as living here, Dr. Franklin White, his wife, Professor F. Robinson White, their son Randolph, and their 2 daughters, Coretta and Rosa, were the first. Dr. White, with a PhD in ecological science, was now the director of the just-built Northern Adirondack Interpretive Center, NAIC for short. His wife was commuting to teach at Plattsburgh State, 60 miles away. They'd bought the biggest and newest house in town, on the point of the lake. They'd even been the subject of a front-page article in the Long Pond Weekly Star. "Welcome the Whites" was the banner headline, with a picture of their smiling faces beneath it. It is a measure of our local journalism that no irony was intended. There hadn't been any article like that about Jimmy T's dad, the new assistant director. Their house on the other side of Long Pond wasn't even lakefront. Randolph and his twin sisters were not smiling as they stood in the entrance to the school cafeteria that first day. People mumbled "excuse me" as they slipped by, but no one made eye contact. No one shook hands. Maybe it was because no one knew what to say. Our images of African American teenagers up here in the sticks are what we get from TV, where rappers and gangbangers predominate. What would the proper greeting be? "Yo dog, what's up?" Or just a normal North Country hiya? Despite the fact that the white kids wore clothes so top of the line that they might have been fashion models, everyone was avoiding them. It was obviously making Randolph and his sisters feel like 4-day-old roadkill. It made me want to yell, "What's wrong with everyone?" I didn't, though. Instead, I walked across the room, sort of in their direction, with my lunch tray in my hand. I didn't really intend to get involved. I could see now that Randolph was shorter than me by a good 4 inches, but he probably outweighed me. Muscles bulged under his designer shirt. Although his jaw was clenched, his face was friendly and pleasant looking. His sisters were easy on the eyes, too. You'd look twice when they walked across a room. Though they were younger than their brother, they were almost my height, and I'm 6'3". The 3 whites were black, but their skin color wasn't much darker than Uncle Tommy's. Almost without realizing what I was doing, I did something that surprised myself. "Hey," I said. I held out my hand to Randolph. He and his sisters jumped a little. They'd been so tense, they hadn't even seen me come up to them. Although I have been told that I have this way of sort of sneaking up on people without their noticing, old Indian trick, as Uncle Tommy puts it, it only took Randolph half a second to recover his poise. "Hello," he said, cracking a small smile as he took my hand. His handshake was a surprise. It wasn't a bone cruncher, like jocks sometimes give each other when they meet. It was gentle, the way Indians shake hands. "I'm Mitch Sabatis. Welcome to Wrong Pond," I said. His smile got broader. "It's the oldest joke we have up here, but under the circumstances, it had a little more zip than usual." "I'm pleased to meet you," he said. "No, yo, no, dog." Perfectly enunciated standard English. "I'm Randolph. These are my two younger sisters, Rosa and Coretta." "Hello," they said, speaking and holding out their hands at the same time. Then, because they'd done it so perfectly in sync, like the start of a dance routine, they giggled. Heads were turning in our direction. I'd broken the ice and survived. The lunch table we took filled up as other kids came over and introduced themselves. As we talked, I realized I'd be seeing a lot of Randolph. He was a football player too. He'd played center at his old school. It wasn't the one Jimmy T went to, but they'd been in the same league. "Is Jimmy T really a big-time QB?" Jacques Dennis asked. "Yeah, he's as good as his clippings," Randolph said. The way he said it made me think there was something else he could have said, but he was holding back. I noticed, too, that the one time Jimmy T glanced over our way, it seemed as if a dirty look passed between him and Randolph. I didn't ask Randolph about it. After all, we were just starting to get to know each other. I was looking forward to that. And his being a center made it even more likely that we'd be spending time together, since I was the punter and place kicker. Randolph had missed preseason practice, but I got the feeling he'd do just fine. He couldn't do any worse than Jock, who was our current center. Everybody knew that Jock actually hated the position. Jock loved D-tackle, and we could use him there. Rosa and Coretta were getting their share of attention too. Nancy Post, who loves clothes more than life itself, was chatting the sisters up about accessorizing, whatever that means. Also, they were basketball players. With their height, they'd really add something to our girls' team. After the conversation was going good around the table, I excused myself. "Later," I said to Randolph. "I'll look forward to that," he responded. I could tell he meant it. I still hadn't introduced myself to Jimmy T. There seemed to be a little lull in the crowd around him, where he was seated 6 tables down. But as soon
What time is
as I walked over, Jimmy T stood up and turned his back on me. The hiya I was about to speak died on my lips. He made his way toward the door like he was late for an important appointment. As small as Long Pond High is, I didn't see Jimmy T for the rest of the school day. It was almost as if he was trying to avoid me. Although, for the life of me, I couldn't figure out why. Sure, there were some mutterings about how there was bad blood between him and Randolph. They'd played on different teams that were bitter rivals. But I couldn't imagine that being friendly with Randolph would keep Jimmy T from talking to me. He must have heard I was Indian too. Even if I did have a blonde mother, I'd always been the only kid in Long Pond School who really identified himself as Indian. And I certainly wasn't the only one with Indian ancestry. There's plenty of native blood in the mountains, but a lot of it is kept hidden. In the past, it was better not to be Indian. And it's not hard for people who are Indian to hide that fact. Just keeping quiet and cutting your hair short and dressing like everybody else is usually enough. A lot of people with Indian blood do just that. That was one of the reasons why I hoped Jimmy T would make an effort to get to know me. I admired him for the fact that he wasn't hiding who he was. He wasn't afraid to let the world know he was a real Indian. Realer than me. A guy who had to dye his brown hair black to make it more Indian. When I was little, I didn't think about it that much. My dad, who was as Indian looking as Cochise, could always handle it with his good nature. People who started out hostile would end up buying him beers. Usually a few too many. They were surprised at how he could hold his booze. What would all they say about Indians not being able to drink without getting all crazy? I don't think my dad was even that drunk the night he died. After all, the tractor trailer that hit his pickup skidded on the ice and crossed into his lane. I started hanging out with Uncle Tommy after my mother and I got back from Sweden. Getting to know him, even though he wasn't really a relative, was like getting to know things about my dad that I'd never known before. I remember the only time when Uncle Tommy asked me why I was hanging around him so much. My dad, I said, never taught me how to be an Indian. Mitchell, Uncle Tommy said to me, white men taught us how to be Indians. Before that, we were just people.